Session of Rajyasabha, which began on 18th of November and concluded on Friday with the upper house clocking around 100% productivity during 20 sittings. Now, this session began with members reflecting on the role of Rajyasabha in Indian polity and the way forward. 15 bills were passed during the session, including some landmark bills like the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Bill, Citizenship Amendment Bill, the Constitution 126th Amendment Bill extending reservation for SCs and STs in the legislatures by another 10 years, and the bill banning e-cigarettes. Now, 39% of the total functional time in Rajya Sabha was spent on legislative business, 25.4% on raising and discussing matters of urgent public importance under short duration discussion, 2 calling attention notices, 0 hour and special mentions. 13% on question hour meant for ensuring accountability of the executive, and 5% on private members' bill. So what are the major takeaways of this landmark session of Rajya Sabha? For more on this, we have a distinguished panel of guests in the studio today. Let me first introduce the guest to you, beginning with Ms. Aditi Fadnis, Political Editor, Business Standard, somebody who keeps a close watch on the proceedings in the Parliament. Chakshu Roy, the Head of Outreach in PRS Legislative, another person who knows what exactly is happening in Parliament, and Mr. K.V. Prasad, the Senior Associate Editor, The Tribune, who's had a long time covering the upper house. Let me begin with you, Chakshu, and let's first start with the statistics. Some of them I mentioned out here, but if we go deeper into it, one question which I want to ask you is, what's the difference between the previous session and this one? Because in the previous session, the productivity was 104%. This is almost 100%. So are we improving on certain parameters?
Vishal, I think 2 or 3 things that stand a little bit different from the previous session. The previous session was the budget session for the new Lok Sabha. There was a lot of time devoted to discussing financial business. The government had come after the general elections. There were a number of bills that had lapsed. So the 2 houses were taking up legislative business, which had lapsed at the end of the 16th Lok Sabha. So a lot of time was taken there. The winter session of Parliament is a little bit of a shorter session of Parliament. So this was a 20-day session. But some of the interesting things that I kind of felt during this session was the importance to question hour. Rajya Sabha probably answered more oral questions in that 1 hour than it has done in many previous years. A couple of things also stood out. The kinds of legislation that was passed. In your opening remarks, you had mentioned some of the key legislation. Let me add to that. During the inter-session period, there were 3 ordinances that were promulgated. One of the important ordinances that was promulgated was the taxation ordinance. Another was the e-cigarette ordinance. Both of them, were done. There were a few standing committee reports that actually submitted, standing committees that actually submitted the report. And an interesting thing happened on the first day of Rajya Sabha. The chairman of Rajya Sabha actually put down a charter for members to consider and reflect as to what is the kind of support that the upper house needed. And part of that support was revamping of rules, infrastructure, research for members of parliament, so on and so forth. Let me begin with that context as to how it played out. And obviously, both Aditi and Prasad sir will talk about, some of the political developments and as to how the parties fared in the 2 houses.
Okay. So one aspect as far as statistics are concerned out here is one more which we can add is in terms of, the increase in the 0 hour submissions and the special mentions as well. But statistics apart, let me begin with you, Aditi. This was the 250th session of the upper house, a landmark event, and we saw how, the members went about it. From the first day itself, there was an intense discussion on suggestions coming in from several members and the chairman himself, as Chakshu is pointing out. But that apart, what are the key highlights or the key takeaways as per you for this particular session?
Well, obviously productivity is the biggest highlight because the chairman has been talking about non-attendance, about presence of members in a very candid and frank manner. These are not things which have been dealt with in such a frank way in the past. So it's a cozy club where nobody talks about other people's lapses. But he has put everything on the table, and it's there for everyone to see. So, and it is a problem, absenteeism and absence of. I mean, there have been situations where in the working period of the last government, the ruling party has lost a bill because they didn't have quorum, and the opposition, despite being in lower in numbers, has managed to make changes in that bill. This has happened at least once, as far as I remember, in the last 5 years.
Okay.
So that kind of thing is upsetting, and it leaves a bad taste in the mouth. So productivity is certainly one thing, but we want to, I mean, upper house is known for the quality of its speakers, the tenor of its speeches, and the voice of those who are not always heard in the lower house. So if the voices are not present in the house, how will they speak and how will you hear them?
Okay. So it's about productivity and ensuring that the presence of the members is there, not only during key legislations but during key discussions there as
Absolutely.
well, and in the committee meetings also, something which the chairman has also pointed out. Mr. Prasad, coming to the legislations part, 15 of them have been passed by the House, and most of them were passed by the Lok Sabha as well. Now, legislations apart, another significant aspect of the House proceedings is the individual members, contribution, and that comes in the form of questions, in the form of zero-hour submissions, in the form of special mentions, and participation in other debates and discussions as well. That seemed to have gone up quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think if you heard the valedictory address of the chairman, he did mention about the fact that this session in particular saw more questions being taken in during oral replies being given by ministers, and that is one of the very good ways of the elected representatives, in this case the members of the Council of States, asking questions to the government of the day. And that's where the accountability in the parliamentary democracy comes out. And that's where a member, irrespective of his party affiliation or her party affiliation, has the right to ask a question. And I think over the years, one thing that has evolved, and this has been tried more, is this taking more questions, wherein the chairman is also insisting that the response of the minister be crisp and very short. Instead of, there was a tendency, and also many members' tendency to, when they ask questions, to preface it with a long context. So instead of that, the chairman has been goading people and cajoling the members to be pointed so that the response is equally sharper and pointed. I think that has in a way helped to focus the energies of members on the minister and the task that the minister and the ministries are doing. So that's one thing. Of course, in debates you get more opportunity because timings are allotted, and according to that you have a specification. And of course, zero-hour mentions add a dimension wherein the government of the day gets to know certain issues that are agitating members in their constituencies or the states from which they come from, or matters of public interest which they think should be flagged, and the government can respond in the way it wants to. So these are some of the tools that are mechanisms available in the parliament system. One of the things over the years, what you notice was a question when a member was against his or her name, a question was listed, was not present in the House, the question would not, they would skip. But over the years they had changed that, allowing supplementaries so that the validity of the question remains. And so this was something which was evolved some time ago. But then absenteeism is something which, as Aditi had pointed out, is something which is being addressed more upfront.
Okay. Chakshu, your views on the absenteeism part, because that seemed to be a problem earlier as well. But now that it is being, looked at, and as Aditi pointed out, everything has been put on the table out there in front of the members. So it looks like this is being addressed, and we can see, these statistics themselves speaking for that.
Vishal, I think Prasad sir has drawn our attention to an extremely important topic. I remember in the 14th Lok Sabha, when Mr. Somnath Chatterjee was the Speaker of Lok Sabha, on one of the sitting days, what happened was that the first 6 or 7 members whose oral questions were listed was not there in the House. So the 7th member whose question was listed was actually surprised, and Somnath Das said, you thought your turn will never come. And anyways, his turn came and he asked the supplementary question, and thereafter both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha changed their rules of procedure. The earlier rule, as Prasad sir mentioned, was that if the member wasn't there, the question was skipped. The rule was changed, and the idea that was given was that since the question is now the property of the House, other members who are there in the House can ask their supplementary question. So I think that's a great thing that has happened. Now, if we come to attendance, attendance has two aspects to it. One is attendance in the House. And very often we have seen that in the post-lunch period, attendance in the House wanes. On a Friday, the attendance wanes. But what the chairman brought attention to, and as Aditi ma'am pointed out, put it on the record of the House, was the attendance of members of Parliament in the parliamentary standing committees. There are 8 parliamentary standing committees which are under the administrative control of Rajyasabha. He pulled out the statistics of the 41 sittings that these committees had and then said that only 18 members had actually 100% attendance in all of these out of the 80 Rajya Sabha members. He also pointed out that the 168 members from Lok Sabha who were represented on these committees, only 18 again had full attendance. And the reason he highlighted this was that in the previous session there was a lot of demand about bills being sent to standing committees, and he wanted to provoke people and encourage them and say, you know what, you've asked for standing committees, bills are now going to standing committees, but where is your commitment to contribution to that process? So I think that's a great thing that's happening, because Parliament already puts out the daily attendance of members of Parliament. Now with the chair pointing out the attendance of members of Parliament in parliamentary committees, hopefully that will provide as an incentive for members of Parliament to actively participate in these meetings.
Okay, so there it is, the issue of attendance as well, and the questions being taken up. Aditi, let's go back to the first day of this particular session, and now we're talking about the individual members. Now on the first day, when 250th session of Rajya Sabha was being talked about, there were several suggestions which came in from the members, and the chairman himself, as Chakshu was pointing out, gave a charter, a point, almost a dozen points for the members to reflect upon, and also ensure that how they can contribute more and what new changes can be made from the future point of view. So do you think that was a good reflective discussion wherein some good suggestions came in, and if some of them can be implemented going further, both by the House and by the members themselves, it might bring some more positive change?
Oh, sure. Anything that that covers the efficiency of the House and makes the House more receptive to better utilization of time is always welcome. We have seen in the past a lot of time being wasted on peripheral things. I find that lately the accent is on contemporaneous discussions rather than on things which are not immediately related to, issues, not to belittle them, but issues of floods and droughts are, well, frankly, they're always there.
The perennial issues.
There is always a flood on somewhere in India, and there's always a drought on somewhere in India. But to make it contemporaneous and to make issues of the economy or issues of onion prices or issues like that, that makes a lot of difference. It also has an immediate connect with people who are listening to what their lawmakers are saying, and it conveys the feeling that somebody out there is looking at our problem and discussing it. So I think the House has been more receptive to much more discussion of news
on broader areas and on broader topics as well. Mr. Prasad, one more aspect here is, and that's been mentioned by the chairman in his valedictory remarks as well, is the issue of speaking in mother tongue. One more language has been added this time around when one of the members spoke in Santali. But the chairman also pointed out, saying that he would wish to go ahead and speak in Telugu for one day, maybe in one of those sessions. This aspect of putting focus on those languages which were not heard so far on the floor of the House.
I think there's one issue which he had flagged right in the beginning when he had taken over as chairmanship, that he wanted to do something on this, and I think he addressed a systemic problem with that, because there were a lot many translators available. So one of the first things the Rajya Sabha Secretariat was asked to do is to go and recruit or hire people who can, qualified translators who can then help members. And the rule is, if you give a 24 hours notice to the Secretariat, the required translations are available, because not everybody are experts in translating, and especially when a parliament is on, and you know, you have to be very, you should be good at your language, the command of the language from the mother tongue or whatever native language is being used into Hindi and English. So you need that kind of a qualified person. So that is one reason I think he addressed the systemic thing, and probably that is why you see a Santali language being spoken, one of the 22, and the chairman did mention that he would like to have a whole day session. And why not? Because it's a council of states, in the sense of states, of course, represent the Union of India, and if we have 22 languages scheduled, more should be heard. And that's because it's much easier, the constituents of that particular state would find it a faster connect.
Okay.
Instead of, say, an English, which many people may not be as fluent or conversant, or some other language, which is, so I think it's a very welcome idea, and I'm sure this will go take it forward.
Okay, and one more aspect of, you know, the suggestions which came in on the first day itself, as Aditi was pointing out, on terms of how to go ahead and you know, find solutions to the challenges which are faced by the House, both in terms of functioning or in terms of improving the efficiency individually, member-wise as well, and the House as a whole.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest advantage the chairman brings is his long years in Rajyasabha. So he knows the inner workings of the House very well, and he has seen both on the side of the government and side of the opposition. So he has fair understanding, and I think they're trying to change rules over a period of time. There have been certain rules which are under discussion. There's a process, and the process just takes a little long because there's a rules committee. Before that, it's the layers in which it goes through. So I think all that is being addressed, and I think as Chakshu also mentioned, the 22 or the 10-point charter, something he actually first said when he gave the Arun Jaitley Memorial Lecture in Delhi University. He gave 10 points which he thinks the parliamentarians, especially the Rajya Sabha members, should do, and then on the 250th session, the opening, when he had a special session, he spelled out what he thinks is reforms in a way that can make the House more effective in taking up the issues that are connected to people, and also the larger issues that people want to bring to the table.
Okay, Chakshu, from your point of view, since you look at a lot of data in terms of, you know, the functioning of both houses, not only the upper house but the lower house as well, but if we strictly, you know, stick ourselves to the upper house proceedings right now, this particular session is over. There were suggestions which were made. Now the next session would also be starting. That's the budget session. In terms of, you know, what might be the key issues which need to be tackled in terms of the suggestions given by the members and that charter which was mentioned by the Vice President as well, or the Chairman of the Upper House?
Yeah. Vishal, I think 2 or 3 things, you know, that have been laid out by the Chair have also been expressed by members. So one is, how do you discuss issues which are contemporary, which are relevant to the nation, something that Aditi ma'am reflected on. If you look at this current session, you know, there was a debate on air pollution in Rajyasabha. There was a debate also on the current economic situation. Now, the balance, you know, in the session time balance is important, because the government has a legislative agenda that, you know, it wants to pilot in the House. Members want to discuss issues in the House. And should the session of Parliament only be for government business or only for members? Or should there be some kind of a balance where the government also gets its legislative agenda, but also a number of contemporary issues also gets discussed? So that's one balance that I think needs to be carved out, in which, you know, the chairman is reflective on, and it reflects in the data. You know, the amount of time that was spent between legislative business and other debates, including special mentions and 377s. You know, there was some, I mean, obviously legislative business was more, but there was an equal importance given to debates. One final thought that I wanted to say is, the next session of Parliament is fairly close, right? I mean, it's about a month away. And that's going to be the longest session of the year. Right? How can some of the learnings from this session be translated into the next session will be equally important.
Okay. Aditi, 30 seconds quickly from you. How can, you know, answering this question, how can the takeaways from this session or the learnings from this session can be implemented in that? Because that's going to be the most crucial session of the year, the budget session, and the longest one as well.
My experience has been that budget session normally does not see too much legislative activity. It's mainly concerned with budget, passing the budget, discussing it and clearing it. So it will be nice if something else can be added to the normal discussion that happens in the budget session.
Okay, in terms of legislative agenda or in terms of the discussions there as well. So there it is, the takeaways and the highlights of the 250th session of the Upper House, that is the winter session, which concluded just on Friday after 20 sittings. We'll keep on bringing you news and updates not only from the sessions of the